All right, so are we...
I am double checking my record location. All right, we are live.
All right.
Well, that's that then.
Here we go.
I'm James,
I'm Brandon.
and we have the first Cognitive Cul-De-Sac episode in a little while, right?
It has been.
The
The coronavirus has been incredibly inconvenient to us personally.
And so let's take a moment to, be thankful that our AV wizard is safe from that, as he was exposed on numerous occasions, back to back.
Yeah.
So really a lucky guy here. If anybody
Lucky us,
needs someone to buy a lottery ticket, ask Alex Gomez.
Right. That's the first thing that I thought of when I heard that he'd been exposed is, well, there goes the podcast.
Right.
You know? And then I thought, oh, Alex, I love him, and I hope he doesn't die. But what do you got to do?
But second, too, of course.
Yes. My own well-being of my hobby.
Right. And, of course, the well-being of all of our audiences who I'm sure could not go a week without hearing our voices.
I'm sure it's been tough. If you want to write in about how hard this has been on you, please do so. Yeah. Write it into... And redacted. Yeah. I'll insert an email into that in post.
Perfect. All right. Well, I wanted to start off today's discussion with a quote from the late, great John Philip Sousa. This is the opening sentence of his essay called The Menace of Mechanical Music, which is a great alliteration. Sweeping across the country with the speed of a transient fashion in slang or Panama hats, political war cries or popular novels, comes now the mechanical device to sing for us a song or play for us a piano in substitute for human skill, intelligence, and soul.
Is that talking about the music distribution machine or?
Yeah, so he's specifically talking about like playing pianos, the pianos that have like the scrolling thing that so he thinks those are a bad idea, and that like the phonograph, like radio recording music at all is not good, because in his day and age, you have to like know a musician or learn an instrument yourself in order to hear music.
Yeah. And before him, you had to travel 300 miles to, the region's bard. Right. And continued in the future, TV killed the radio star.
And that's pretty much that. We have too, as we get more into this discussion, we have a fan of ours, on with us today.
Yeah. Our biggest fan.
Right.
Yeah.
Certainly not the biggest fan, but look at it. It's like about 12 inches in height.
And the only problem is that he just blows hot air.
Oh, it's a he.
I hadn't honestly intended to gender it. That's kind of weird. I mean, I guess it's sort of phallic. In a stubby sort of way.
All right, Dr. Rorsch. And in addition to the fan that we have on with us today, we do have a guest. Cameron Wayne Schultz, Esquire III. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I am a approximately 6 foot tall humanoid person with shoulder-length hair. I'm currently weathering a global pandemic, and I'm here today to talk to you guys about the mechanical reproducibility of music. So what is up?
Yeah.
I'm starting to think that quote wasn't a coincidence.
Almost certainly not. Because really we're here to solve that problem of art being hard to manufacture and market. John Philip Sousa, he had to get a whole bunch of people together to march in a band to play things that he wrote and conducted and stuff like that. So, the manufacturing requires 80 people all in the same place at the same time, skilled laborers of their instruments. And, to market that, how do you tell people that there's going to be a parade and that's their one chance to hear music for that year, right?
So he probably owns stock in the parade industry is what you're saying.
Big parade, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like he's just a classic techno-regressivist, right? He had built a livelihood around a form of media or an industry that became obsolete.
But I do think his concerns about human skill, intelligence, and soul are apt because, if they weren't, then we wouldn't have such artists today as Greta Van Fleet or
For instance.
other just mechanically produced musicians. People that make music to an equation because there's enough music that's been made and a low barrier to entry for that. You don't need to have skill or soul to play an instrument. You can just click a sample and play it.
What does our guest have to say about that?
I know we should probably ask a musician.
At the risk of putting words in the late great John Philip Sousa's mouth, I kind of think that. I think that one of the threads that he's pulling at there is that he seems to be afraid that if we put a player piano and a tiny little dinky guitar in every person's house, in every person's room, that the barrier to what it constitutes music, what constitutes the skill level of a musician, it's at risk of being cheapened to the point where it's you can play a couple of notes, you can make a guitar sound jangly, you can bang on a piano, therefore you're a musician, or therefore you have, this access to, you're an artist. I think he's just afraid of he's afraid of a decay of the social structures around art and appreciating what art even is and how art is actually supposed to interpret human experience,
Interesting. Well, then along that same vein, any instrument that's not the human vocal box is a decay of the true artistic form, right?
Yeah, and the thing that's tricky about here is that almost every time, just like any kind of digital file or something, every time you reproduce something, it kind of becomes a little bit more degraded or cheapened without some kind of protective force, like music education, right? It's once every family in America has a piano, then piano teachers will probably start cropping up everywhere because you want people to be able to play the piano. There's a technique, right? There's a form to it.
Mm-hmm. I think
too, so there needs to be some kind of a protective measure so that it doesn't just become a cheap commodity,
Right.
Who polices art?
That's a good point. Us, apparently.
John Philip Sousa. John Philip Sousa could because he hired musicians, and if you weren't playing for John Philip Sousa, then nobody was listening to you anyway. So he was the arbiter of who is skilled enough to be a musician and who is an amateur.
Right.
Now, anybody that self-publishes on SoundCloud is a professional rapper.
Yeah.
Right. That's a very analogous concept there, James. I like that.
But at the same time, we shouldn't dissuade people from approaching this and doing their best to generate art. Everybody starts out bad, right? Not everybody's a Beethoven or a Bach. So we need to be careful not to dissuade people from trying.
Right. And to say that there's it's a matter of quantity and quality too, I think, because you bring up Bach, he was only able to play music when he was at his church organ. The organ didn't exist in his bedroom or in his house for that matter. It was in the church where he would only go to play for church things.
Okay.
And I think now anybody with a computer can make music. And I think Deadmau5 or Porter Robinson are able to compose pretty artistic things with with a tool that is essentially every tool in one.
But given Sosa's argument, the only actual viable artistic expression that they ever exhibit is on the first time they play that, because they are essentially using modern day player pianos. And so every time that it's reproduced artificially through your phone speakers, it's diminished and it's bad for some reason. Right?
And something that's kind of interesting about Bach is a lot of his compositions that he wrote were actually designed for musicians to play. And his fugues and his preludes, he wrote for musicians that could not improv. So basically Bach's writing a lot of these things that are for the musician of the day, if you can't really improv in the key of C, why don't you try this? It was like a home cookbook for musicians at the time. It was like, how about you just go and and then it's like, then you're improvising, and it's like, even in a way, Bach was almost like cheapening his own art. But I think it's important that to educate and to spread the good word of music and how valuable it is, you need to cheapen it a little bit, and you need to break things down. You need to make it digestible, and you need to be able to reproduce it for people to understand what it is. But then there needs to be you still need to be able to keep your eyes on the goal, that the main goal is human expression and human enrichment,
Yeah.
And I do think, like, I'm certainly thankful for having, like, a Spotify playlist and, like, having that in my pocket and being able to listen at a whim.
Bach in your pocket.
Bach pocket. But I think still, though, there's, like, in the case of Spotify, like right now they're kind of getting some heat because they basically have a pay-to-play scheme with their featured playlists.
Payola.
And so, like, that's like, again, art is hard to manufacture and market. Like, artists can't just make sheet music and then, like, become famous artists for that. Like, Bach's era is over. Now artists are famous for the music that they put out, how frequently they put it out, and how often it reaches number one on the charts. And that often has to do with whether or not Spotify is shoving it in your face. Like, last week, a Taylor Swift album came out and a Kid Cudi album came out. And Apple Music, like, the front page of it was all just, like, all Taylor Swift content. Like, here's the music that made Taylor Swift famous. They're showing her entire discography before they mention that, there's this other guy that came out with an album. Another just sidebar on Taylor Swift getting in the way of better art. In 2015, she won Album of the Year over Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, which I think is just the epitome of sacrilege in music awards. But
yeah, well, she appeals to more people. She has a broader audience because it isn't as complex and nuanced, right?
So her art, I would say, is
authentic.
easy to manufacture and market because it's probably geared towards, a wider audience. So there's, a bigger market. And it's, I don't want to discredit her too much as an artist because I think she's talented. But it sounds like Cam might.
Yeah, that was me beeping over here. But I think this kind of speaks to a little bit of like what we were kind of talking about earlier, or like what I was trying to say. It's like people, there's an industry around all of this music and all of these artists, right? And now in the modern age, like you were just saying, James, every aspect of these people, including their art, their personality, how often they release all this stuff, like people are all into this. They get into these like weird cult of culture, and they fetishize like things like Taylor Swift, and they fetishize like certain aspects of art. And the industry is so savvy to know exactly that, oh yeah, man, people are obsessed with this stuff. So let's just push it. And that is the exact definition of cheapening art, to me, at least in my opinion, right? Because you're not pushing it for any kind of any of its ideological or its substance. You're pushing it simply out of this, I know people are obsessed with this, and I know that this is going to sell really big, and I think that kind of cheapens a lot of art, especially when you're doing these things at like the expense of like giving Taylor Swift a whole giant cover. It's like, okay, but like, what about all of the other awesome artists? It's like we're reliving the same dream over and over again. It's like Taylor Swift releases an album, and therefore everybody and their mothers is like submerged in Taylor Swift goo from the industry or whatever. You know what I mean? Because they just think that's what everybody likes. It's kind of weird and creepy.
Yeah. So all of that being said, we specifically brought this up to analyze Greta Van Fleet, right?
Yeah.
Greta Van Fleet is essentially
a rock band,
tantamount to a Led Zeppelin cover band. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it down to the level of the lead singer has perfected Robert Plant's voice so much that it is often indistinguishable from Led Zeppelin. And there's a big divide in the musical community as to whether this is a bad thing or a good thing. So I personally land on this is a good thing. I'm happy to listen to him. I enjoy it. And I'm not necessarily a purist when it comes to music. So That might be why.
And is that because there's like you've listened to all the Zeppelin that you can?
That's exactly,
and
yeah.
there's not more Zeppelin coming?
Right. So to me, it's almost like it's as close as I'll ever get to hearing new Zeppelin content again. And
have you listened to Robert Plant and the Sensational Space Shifters?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, he has a band still. He's out there touring.
Well, I'm sure it's not the same as Zepp.
Yeah, but the Sensational Space Shifters aren't Led Zeppelin at all. You know, they're definitely
Not at
different.
all.
Yeah, very different content. Right, so that's the order I'm coming from. I just felt like it was a nice freebie Led Zeppelin-ish type deal, and then I got to enjoy some new content. But some people want to kill me for that opinion. So that's why we are here talking about this today.
Right, and as I'm sharpening my knives, I am thinking about how, I initially didn't necessarily have a huge problem with Greta Van Fleet. Their first album, I was like, okay, this is good. Like, it's cool. Like, they're bringing back a classic sound. Like, and they did have, I think, a couple songs that were more distinguishable from Led Zeppelin that were kind of like a little bit more, incorporated some more modern elements and some of their other influences. When they came out with their second album and really just like zeroed back in on like, we're going to sound like Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
And like, that's when they became, to me, entirely unremarkable and antithetical to good art.
Yeah. What's our guest think about this?
Mr. Musician?
I think, right, there's like a discussion or a historical back and forth in music, right? It's like, I grew up, I love Led Zeppelin. Like, my dad, we banged their records. The Led Zeppelin and the Stones, like, I grew up listening to those sounds, and I love those sounds, and I definitely idealized a lot of those sounds. I agree with what you said, James. I actually agree with what both of you said. I agree with what James said because, I did actually really enjoy their first project a lot, and I agree with the other sentiment that, hey, I never got to see Led Zeppelin. I would love to see a band that could channel that kind of energy and that kind of music. Where I kind of think that they go astray for me I'm a little bit more of a purist, just because like I am a musician and I kind of hold some standards to myself when I make music. It's like I think that their rock has come back around and it's kind of back in vogue again. And Greta Van Fleet is pushing this brand of rock that is almost indistinguishable from previous classic rock. And I kind of believe that it's more when these things come back around and these trends hit you back. Like in the early 2000s, you have bands like The Strokes, Arctic Monkeys,
White
The
Stripes,
Killers, Arcade Fire, The White Stripes. All these bands were rock and roll revival. People were saying rock is back, rock is back. But the thing that all these bands did was they took rock and they reinvented the formula for a different historical time. Like Led Zeppelin, the thing to me is you can't reproduce Led Zeppelin because Led Zeppelin came out of the counterculture and hippies and the civil rights movement. There was in the 60s and 70s was a totally different time. And, you can get close to that. But I think like when, they come out there, my little quote is like, Greta Van Fleet arrives in the fashion and the musical savvy of the 60s and 70s for the sake of a popular commercial reaction, but there's no organic recontextualization of any of the sounds of rock music. To me, at least, it feels a little bit like a little bit too on the nose, especially with their second project. So I think that's kind of where I land on them. But
yeah, I think, and it's that notion too of like it's when you see like Led Zeppelin live, and when Led Zeppelin was playing and touring live, it was a like to spit in your parents' face. It was to go to a Led Zeppelin concert and party with rock stars. It was the rock concert itself was like a thing, right? I mean, you had people follow bands like Grateful Dead and Phish, all around the country because and these are like kind of jam bands who have different shows every time. Like people have their favorite live albums of Grateful Dead, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not something that you really get today at all. Like when you go to a tour, like you're like, oh, I really hope they play this song because it's my favorite. And to be disappointed if like one song wasn't played as you leave a concert is like kind of sad, because you're not there to like appreciate what they're doing. You're there to like scratch an itch that you have.
Well, I don't think it's fair to say that doesn't exist today. I think that the mainstream, the popular culture artists that are doing concerts do that, where they play their hits. Maybe they'll cover another famous hit from somebody else. Yeah. But it's not fair to say that doesn't exist.
That's true. And it's
listen to this guy named Mark Rebier. Have you seen him?
No.
He's
I love Mark Rebier.
Yeah, dude, and he's amazing, and it's a whole experience, and he never plays the same song twice, and so I think it's fair to say that does exist still. It's just become a little bit less popular culture.
Well, and back to the EDM thing, it's a big difference when you see on like a lineup poster, it's like Porter Robinson, like parentheses live set or DJ set.
Yeah. And
like it's a matter of are they going to hit play and like, do a little embellish here or there? Are they going to
twist that right knob or the left knob?
Or are they literally like performing live?
Exactly.
And it's, I think, much more exhaustive for a musician to do the latter, where they just live.
Yeah, it's riskier too.
Cam?
Well, and I just think, I think the thing that makes me sort of bitter about, especially from after their second project with Greta Van Fleet, is like, it's that thing we were talking about with the industry and reproducing it, is like, it's too in my face. It's a little bit like, I actually, maybe I would have come on to them if they had like not quite tried to package this marketing of like, hey, we're Led Zeppelin too, and we're going to sound just like them. And it felt like all the marketing was like targeted at people that love Led Zeppelin and love rock music, even like myself. But then it was almost like, hey, you guys are messing with me a little bit.
I know, they literally look like them. Exactly.
Trying to tell me they are, and the thing is, I actually think they're wonderfully talented musicians. They jam, they do rock, like they're talented guys, and they're so young. It's just that, like, I think that they're marketing themselves out of their depth a little bit, and it's like they're not totally appreciating like Led Zeppelin was like its own movement.
I'm now kind of thinking I'm now kind of thinking that Greta Van Fleet are really the victims here, right? Like, they could be doing so much more. They could be recontextualizing rock in the 2020s. But instead, because of the difficulty of manufacturing and marketing art, they have to be like, oh, like people will only remember us or think about us if we sound exactly like Led Zeppelin.
They piggybacked off them. And I think it's also important to remember that it doesn't cheapen Led Zeppelin's work when Greta Van Fleet does something like this. A lot of people, I think, get really defensive and hostile because they go, hey, that music is sacred to me. How dare you? But they can be mutually exclusive, right? It doesn't ruin Led Zeppelin to have a band like Greta Van Fleet come and tap into their energy, as Cam so eloquently put.
And so I do want to also get to the person that got us talking about Greta Van Fleet today, Anthony Fantano. The internet's busiest music nerd, as he has titled himself. He is a music critic who I think has really perfected the art of criticism. Yeah. Like, I can't say that he does a bad job of reviewing music.
Yeah. But he's so easy to hate.
And I love to hate him.
Yeah.
Every time but I think there are, and I'm speculating here, but I think there are people who might even like watch his review of an album before listening to it so that they know whether or not they should like it.
And I think that pollutes the criticism industry, right? Because you should come up with opinions independently, right? A lot of people don't, though. They outsource that and they go, what does my favorite reviewer think of it?
Well, and then they align with it. And he does end all of his videos with like, did you like it? Did you listen to this album? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Like, and he does, I think, try to get people to think about music a little more critically, which I think we should all, try to do. Like, don't just mindlessly consume things. But the way that he has his like mechanical like he critiques music from a very like sort of mechanical place, right? What I don't like about him is when he doesn't consider like the place that the artist is in when they make the music, like what they're really trying to say. Like a lot of music isn't necessarily meant to be accessible or in some cases
Consumed at face value.
Right. And so like so there's this guy I really like, Albert Hammond Jr. He's a guitarist from The Strokes, and he has this solo record. And The Strokes have, they put out an album this year, but before that it had been, I think, 10. And a few years ago, Albert Hammond Jr. puts out a solo record, and it's really good. And Anthony Fantano comes in here and says like, this is garbage, like he's just making Strokes music, and it's like, and critiques him for basically not reinventing the wheel.
Exactly. What does our guest Cam have to say about this?
James kind of touched on it there. Like, I think there's really like, there's like two like art or music. There's like, it's like a coin. There's two sides. There's like two values that I primarily think that it has. It's like, it has an interpretive value, which is like what James was kind of getting at, where it's like not all music is really made to like even make you feel good, and some of it's really kind of disturbing and dark. Like an artist that I really love that's very avant-garde, like The Voids, and it's another side project of The Strokes, but Julian Casablancas' side project with The Voids. Like a lot of their stuff is like almost is unlistenable, and in an intentional way. It's almost like it's really trying to get you to wake up and just list here what like music that's not produced to a certain standard sounds like, and it's like jarring in that way. But they have a very high interpretive value. So like they're interpreting, like ideas, and they're very heady, right? They're trying to present more of like a philosophy, and that's like the interpretive value of art. But then there's also the entertainment value, right? There's also like The Voids are great for that, but they're not really always as entertaining, right? They're not necessarily going to be on the top of the Billboard charts because their music is in a lot of ways intentionally inaccessible. And so that's the trick really when you're producing music, is you really got to know, in manufacturing and marketing, like you got to know what kind of artist this is, what kind of message they're trying to send. And it's some music, the message isn't really important. Like it's more about the entertainment value, and that's not like an evil or bad thing. It's just, it is. And, that dichotomy exists in all art, and you need to just be aware that it exists, right? Partially as a consumer, so you can intelligently consume things that like you're self-identical with, but also so that you can recognize, when maybe like the culture industry or industries are trying to push something on you that, I don't know, is maybe just garbage.
Yeah, and we see a lot of that.
Garbage being pushed on us. Yeah, I think
you do?
Sometimes.
Rarely. If ever.
No, I wanted to, it's back to the point of Greta being a victim of this industry. And it's like, it's great that Julian Casablancas can do that and like do all these, he can make this inaccessible music that is made for maybe musicians a little bit more. And it's like, but Greta Van Fleet does not have the entire Strokes discography, putting him on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a luxury that Julian Casablancas has because he's
absolutely
well regarded as an artist.
Right.
So he is, so that goes back to that question of like, who's the art police, right? Like Greta Van Fleet can't necessarily be experimental with their debut album
and achieve the level of success that they want to.
Right. And the level of success necessary to keep doing art. Like if they're not successful with their first album, mm-hmm. then the band will probably break up and they'll get day jobs.
So they sold their soul to the devil for quick cash, mm-hmm. and now they get to play. So the question is, let's watch them and see if they take the opportunity to use this shortcut that they've taken and start artistically expressing themselves in more of a relevant way to themselves.
One of my actually favorite band is Portugal the Man. They released 5 albums on their own label, like just self-produced, all of which I think are very good, different, unique sounds, personal to them. then with their sixth album, they signed on to their sixth, seventh, and eighth albums are all signed on to major labels, and the songs are a lot more structured, radio friendly, and accessible. They're still very good. And I think what really I like about them is that approach that they took. They're like, it's so clear to me that they're making the music for its own sake that I trust them to go to a pop album. Like their most recent album, it's funny, they literally sold a merch line for it that had t-shirts printed, I liked Portugal the Man, before they sold out.
Nice.
And it's because this most recent album is like, it's kind of poppy, it's very radio friendly, like the song Feel It Still won single of the year over Despacito because it was on the radio that much and it was really built for radio.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, like, I have no problem with them doing that because I trust them with this body of work that they have. If somebody starts with that, then I'm very, like, hostile towards them, which is probably unfair to them.
Right. I agree. Cam?
Well, and I mean, Greta Van Fleet also has like an interesting history in themselves. It's like, and it's like they.
Everyone
I believe does. They were kind of coached and sort of initially produced by like Kid Rock, which like he's a commercial artist. He has some renown for. I think that also pollutes, maybe my perception of them, because Kid Rock is kind of known for like lifting a lot of classic rock tropes, like Sweet Home Alabama, and like putting them into songs and just literally like taking the aesthetic of like, I'm a classic rocker. I look the part. I sound like the classic
Kid Rock.
I can produce it, so I'm just going to do that. And to me, it's just a little bit, and it's not that, right, I'm not here to say that anything is good or bad, and I can't even pass judgment on that. It's just that,
I think we can say
personally, to me, I really value music that makes me think, music that challenges me to think about my own perception of the world and of music. And I really truly believe that that's the underlying purpose of it all. Really, like, why am I making music? When I sit down to write music or create music, like, I want to put something in someone's head that, I don't really, maybe it's not going to be on the top of the radio charts. I'm not necessarily doing that. I don't have any intention to do that. It's just that I want to create music that, people can kind of identify with and makes them think a little bit deeper. The reason that Portugal the Man, I think they have some more forgiveness with those those clever marketing schemes, is because they're being intentionally facetious. They're like actually kind of drawing back the curtain on these modes of production, and they're saying, look, like, we know that this is how the industry operates, and we're just going to go ahead and do it, but we're also going to tell you, And I just really like, I like that. And I think that, Greta Van Fleet didn't really have that luxury because of like who they were being produced by, right? Where they were being produced, what they were being produced for was to sell commercial records that like were part of this classic rock revival. Yeah. So
Kid Rock taught them everything they knew. And
yeah, I mean, that makes a lot more sense now. And it makes me like them less knowing they were coached by Kid Rock. Yeah, he actually apparently he comes from a very affluent family and background, and he adopted the whole like, Joe Sixpack angle to sell products, to sell content. And ever since I learned that about him, I just don't appreciate him.
That was actually something that came up with the Strokes too, because they were like a grunge rock band in New York, and then people realized that they all had rich dads and went to boarding schools, and
how dare they?
And they were like, yeah, you guys can't be rock stars. Like, you haven't suffered enough.
You're dirty fake.
It's an interesting question.
You're not really that sweet.
Are you more authentic the more you've suffered? Probably. As an artist,
Nietzsche would say yes.
Yeah, well, he's not here right now.
He's not here right now.
So this raises some interesting questions. Like, we've been looking backward into time about art a lot tonight.
Yeah.
But we also wanted to explore forward and ask some questions about like, what is the ultimate expression of art, futuristically? Right,
because I think we do see like some very interesting and creative like mediums of, especially with COVID, like we have people doing concerts in Fortnite. That was pre-COVID, I guess. But another band I like, Glass Animals, their website is actually an entire like Windows 95 operating system ran in browser. And you like click around and you go into the files, and that's where they have like samples that you can download for your own purposes, and like visual art that you can use to make like, you know, wallpapers and stuff like that.
That just seems like a clever gimmick to me. I wouldn't
It's
call that a
marketing
medium.
for sure. It's the internet's a medium, right?
An artistic
web
medium,
browser.
I guess.
Yeah, and I think you'll have people like, another thing I really like about Portugal the Man is that all of their like kind of cover art and stuff are hand drawings by the lead singer. Like he's got a very distinct kind of like drawing style.
Okay.
And the visual art that makes its way onto merch and onto album covers is something that I, you know, want to support as well, or represent or consume in some way.
So the question was, what is the ultimate medium of art? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think like, what is the most technologically advanced canvas for art?
Interesting. Do you have something to input on that, Cam?
Yeah, I do. I have some input on that. I got a canned cam response over here. Okay,
Lay it on
I was
us.
trying to do something that didn't work. But anyway, like I think you know, like, so another artist that, at the risk of looking a little bit into the past, like, oh, what, it was only like 2018 or 17 or 18 or something. Like another one of my big favorite artists. I mean, I have to say I love Muse. So they are a rock band, more prog rock kind of out there. But they actually always push the envelope, and that's one of the things I love about them. And I think their newest project, Simulation Theory, while it wasn't my favorite project of theirs, I do think that they present an interesting idea, and I kind of am into it, like where music could be in the future ideally is like virtual reality, like simulation, like a song is really like you're simulating. It's an art simulating a feeling or an idea or an experience through a medium. And I think like incorporating that, right, that the sound and the visual, and then the only thing that we're not experiencing right now with like Spotify or with your streaming services is like your sense, like your feeling, like you're not like submerged in the world of that this person is really, you're not living in their shoes.
Are you saying that you want to know?
That's the last frontier. And like Muse made this great video for one of their songs, I think it was Pressure, and Terry Crews was actually in the video. And right, it's like all about like putting the listener in this like really weird virtual reality Muse simulation, and they were just trying to create this whole dynamic where it's like, it's a POV almost. Like you're like, I'm the listener, but like I'm watching this, I'm like integrated into this weird motion picture that's like synthesizing all these visual and auditory mediums. And I kind of think virtual reality music or virtual reality music videos, I don't know what.
I mean, you still won't be able to.
I think that's the future.
You still won't be able to smell and taste in virtual reality. And so I'm hoping that
at some point you will, 100%.
But for now, we could have, you know, scratch and sniff like album covers.
Yeah, and it just smells like the grungy rock band back in the green room.
It smells like the garage that the garage rock album was recorded in.
And it smells like the Philadelphia Flyers mascot. What's that guy's name? He's like that weird.
Oh, you're talking about the Philly Fanatic, the Phillies mascot.
Yeah. Oh, it's the
big,
Phillies.
like,
I was incorrect. Sorry. You guys can crucify me for that. But yeah, it smells like that guy.
He smells like anarchy, by the way, to answer your question.
I will say that concerts do have a very distinct smell. Like the crowd of sweaty people, like it's like there's this like almost like irony, like like metallic like scent.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
I do want to also talk about art that is not necessarily like not just musical art, because like I think you yourself are an artist. You manufacture and market sculptures.
Right. I do my best. Yeah, I mean, art is, how do you define art? And my answer has always been, art is the thing we do to tickle our consciousness. Like, as sentient beings, we make art to sort of like play with reality a little bit in a way that emotes some feeling, whether it be good or bad or sad or a crazy combination of all of the things. So when we talk about what is the ultimate form of artistic medium, I can't help but think a little bit into the future in terms of like solar system scale art installations and things like that. So I've actually brought up to you in the past this book called The Three Body Problem.
Yeah.
And the three body problem is an orbital mechanics conundrum. So three bodies orbiting one another is an inherently unstable system, but there are certain configurations that are very unnatural that can be instituted with the right initial conditions to get these into a stable orbit around one another. And, you know, there's figure eights and like these crazy shapes that you can get these things to do. And so, you know, I can't imagine any greater, more ultimate form of an artistic medium than like putting three stars into some very interesting, beautiful configuration of orbits.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a larger art installation than I think, certainly beyond today's technology.
I mean, thinking along those terms, have you ever heard about how weird and unlikely our moon size and placement from Earth is?
Yeah.
And how it is the only reason we're able to see these total solar eclipses is because how weirdly positioned our moon is.
Yeah, and how it's like perfect. The distances between them makes it like the perfect, like it's the exact same like size as the sun as it appears from Earth.
Exactly. So who's to say that that isn't an art installation from some ancient civilization that was like, you know what would be sick is to see the sun go behind the moon, and they put it right there. That's what I would do. That's all I'm saying.
Are you saying that you put the moon there?
Yes.
Actually, another album I really like, just quick side note, is Who Built the Moon by Noel Gallagher. Good stuff.
That guy knows what's up.
Cam, did I hear you beep?
What?
Did you have, were you going to chime in?
No, I did not beat, but I was just kind of like muttering in agreement with that album. I really do like the Who Built the Moon album as well.
I'll have to listen to it.
There's another, as we're talking about moons, there's a Foster the People song I really like called A Beginner's Guide to Destroying the Moon.
Ooh.
Which is just
deep.
I'm
all on board with these moon-based album covers, dude. That's what's up.
So I think the idea of can nature be art? Like, are Saturn's rings art?
Nature's the greatest artist, arguably, right? I mean, the complexity, the beautiful thing, we are nature's art in a way. We are such a great form of art that we create our own art. I mean, we didn't create ourselves, nature did, am I wrong?
I don't think so.
Or aliens.
One of the two. The aliens that put the moon there.
What do you think, Cam?
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's like a really beautiful way to put that is like, you know, we are the product of some kind of cosmic artist in a weird way, right? It's like, you know, that's kind of like the inevitable like conclusion of art. And I think that's why we make art in the first place. It's like you were talking about, like manipulating reality. Like that's it. Like, right. It's like we tinker with things and we play with things just like as we would imagine a creator must have tinkered with, or whatever, you know, some cosmic forces have tinkered with, you know, the materiality of the universe and have created us like some incidental way.
Yeah.
And, you know, I kind of just think that it's important to, it's just like important, whatever the ideal form of art is, I think that it's just important that it always makes us question our own perspective, right? Yeah. And that I think it always should bring us back to ourselves and like where our original thoughts and how we can kind of improve on them and how we can do things that tinker with things in ways that we maybe never tinkered with them before, because that creative streak is like the lifeblood of all art in general. And you guys were kind of talking about like, you know, how almost can anything be art, and like modernism, like the modernism, like the movement in art is like Andy Warhol, for example, like in like the Brio pad or whatever, you know, or like the Campbell's soup can, right? It's like modernism, like in a way is really cool because it's kind of poking fun at this idea of like, is art over when anything can be art, or is art only just beginning at that point?
Yeah.
You know,
that's a good point. That's a really good example that makes you question the nature of it, because a soup can is art.
Yeah,
I guess.
And then you hear about these like these just stories of like some kids like go to like the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, and they put like some kid just sets down his pair of glasses on like an
Right.
empty display case,
Yeah.
and they come back and then there's a glass case around it.
Right. Yeah. I've heard about that. Yeah, it's like in Always Sunny in Philadelphia where he's going, derivative, crap, this I love. And she goes, sir, that's the air conditioner. Yeah.
Yeah, Andy Warhol did that one.
And so I think to bring it back around to this idea that now if anything is art, that means everybody's an artist, right? And to that I would say everybody can be an artist.
Right.
Not every action is artist, or not every action produces art. And that's where I would say like we run into this well, I'll say people that are creating art, like that's as close as you can be to like, you know, the divine, really. If you're like emulating a creator and like doing natural, like creating like a thing that has in its kind of own way a life of its own, then that's like, you know, as next to godliness as you can be.
That means that CERN is the greatest art installation on Earth, right? Because they're very possibly creating microgalaxies, Big Bang events that then play out an entire universe worth of acts. They are gods.
They very well could be. And so if artistry is next to godliness, we had someone suggest to us that opinionness is next to kingliness. And I think art is more than opinion. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Like it lies somewhere in the realm between fact and opinion.
It's implication and inference.
And I think somebody that, you know, asserts opinion as fact is, you know, a king. Only a king could do that. And the notion that, you know, anybody's opinion is like not all, and I'll say this too, not all opinions are created equal. Like somebody's opinion about a vaccine is, some random person's opinion about a vaccine is, you know, less matter of fact than a scientist's opinion about a vaccine, because it's not an opinion at all.
Right.
But that is to say, though, that people do market or manufacture and market opinion as if it were art. And that's what I think we have, like, you know, some different YouTubers or TikTok influencers or whomever that's really just like kind of stating things and like, you know, claiming that's art. And I was actually listening to this comedian's podcast, and they talked about how they weren't really like too scared of, or they didn't feel threatened by YouTube and like all these other things, like because people still wanted, you know, more well-constructed jokes that you might find on a sitcom or like a sketch show. When people started turning the camera towards themselves is when he felt that people would lose their appetite for more structured comedy. And that people started to just laugh at things. Like people could get their laughing itch, their comedy itch scratched in a 6-second Vine. And then at that point, the only things that you would tune into a show for would be these dramas that would invoke all of these other feelings.
Well, I think that that's probably because Vine tapped into a more pure form of comedy than a structured stand-up special, right? Comedy is subversion of expectation. And actually, these comedians go way out of their way to make their routine seem non-planned and non-structured. And the most successful ones were the best at hiding the structure. So Vine really did tap into the spontaneity and randomness that we find humorous.
So which one is like more artful though, right? Is it like, because I do think that like some Viners or maybe now TikTokers put a lot of like, you know, care into their work and like it could be considered art. And others is more just kind of like, I don't know, I guess
like slapstick, lowbrow humor.
Yeah, but but then, I mean, that's not to say though that like the Three Stooges weren't art when they were doing slapstick.
Right.
So comedy is a very interesting type of art, I guess, now that I think about it, and kind of could be discussed. That's an entirely different cognitive cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get to this idea of what we're doing here and whether or not it's art.
Yeah.
Or whether we might just be garbage.
Yeah. Well, we're almost certainly garbage.
Sure.
But, we make art to express things. And I think that we're expressing things. I mean, verbal diarrhea is a form of expression after all. And, yeah.
Is it art?
I don't know.
Who are we kidding?
We're kidding ourselves, that's for sure. What do you think, Cam?
I have to say, I think like art really begins like what you guys were kind of talking about a little bit ago is like, well, like anybody can be an artist, but not everything is art, right? So it's like I can't just like fart and have that be like, wow, that was art. It's like like Hegel kind of talks about like there's this back and forth. It's like you do something X happens, right? Just like on like slapstick comedy, or you have an idea, or on the podcast, right? And the reason that I think this podcast actually does fall into that category of art is because you lay down an idea, right? Somebody lays down an idea, you lay down something that's interesting, and then then that's your first point. So you plotted a point there, and then somebody else reflects upon this point, and so it's almost like now you have a B point, right? But then there's this constant back and forth between A and B, and then when you return to A, it's more robust because we talked about B, right? And then that's where you start getting art. Just like when you play a chord progression, right? Like I could pick up my guitar right now and play, like F, C, G, whatever, like a 1, 4, 5 progression or something like that. But it doesn't really become. It's just a progression. It doesn't become art until you reflected upon it and say, oh, that's kind of cool. And then in that reflection, there's usually a but or an and that's where you actually start getting into the art part of it, because then it becomes some kind of a critical reflection on like an otherwise maybe unnotable or unremarkable human experience, but something that we all share, And so therefore, I think you guys aren't garbage.
Thanks, man.
That's reassuring.
Yeah,
and I think I like that idea of like a 1, 4, 5. And needing the but or the and, because in music the but or the and would be like, oh well, we'll make one of those like minor, we'll throw like a diminished seventh or whatever. I don't know that stuff as well as he does, but in improv it's a yes and, right? Mm-hmm. Like somebody says something, you have to accept it,
right,
and then add something,
right?
And so there is that like feedback loop that results in like a story being woven. I want to also just briefly bring up the I think if we want to talk about art, we could go back to the Greeks, who some might say like invented art in many forms that we still use today. They like invented the tragedy, the comedy. Their amphitheater really lent itself towards a lot of things, including something that they almost practiced as a sport, which was rhetoric. People gave speeches about positions that were either like morally abhorrent or just downright like, kind of wrong in some other way. And it was kind of like a game to see if you could get people to like emotionally be behind something. Yeah. And so there's this one like example of this fellow named Lysias who gives this speech about how you're morally obligated to kill people that sleep with your wife, which murder is generally not regarded as like a good idea, but like in this speech he makes this hugely convincing argument where by the end of it you're like, yeah, like if I'm not killing the people that like my wife is adulterous with, then like I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
And of course that's just rhetoric,
right? So the point you're making is that that's what we do. We examine problems. We pick stupid hills to die on in the hopes that we sucker our viewers into believing completely felonious thoughts.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's I don't think that's like disingenuous or like that. I think that's certainly art, because there's like the viewer can see it happen, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's like when it's like when we were talking about how Portugal the Man, they told us they were selling out, right? They told us they were going to be making pop music, and then we're okay with it.
Yeah.
Like when people, watch us, at this stage, they know us as individuals.
All six of them.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they know that we're,
bullshitters.
And proficient at that.
Yeah.
And they're probably glad that we're putting that to, some use or some sort of entertaining end.
Yeah, I like to think so. But at the end of the day, I really don't care. I don't do this for the viewership. I do it because I enjoy the discourse. And at the end of it, I feel good.
And that's what makes me really confident that this is art, is because I enjoy making it.
Yeah.
If I didn't, it would be work.
Yeah. And God knows we don't work.
Right. I retired.
Yeah. Well, you're like 60 now, so.
I did also want to, I think we're a little past this in the conversation, but I've just been thinking about in my head, the tragedy of
Darth Plagueis the Wise.
Michael Jackson.
Same.
And I think, like, to a lesser extent, Justin Bieber or Miley Cyrus or any of these, like, children that are really,
chewed up
like,
by the pop machine.
Yeah, and I think, like, Michael Jackson was really, like, maybe not the first, but, like, he came into the music industry at a very interesting time, right? As the Jackson 5, he was, like, a child.
Yeah.
He was,
literally.
like, given hormone treatments so that his voice would stay high, and then he was the first to really make music videos. Like he was what made MTV like big. And clearly, like, he was messed up by all of that.
Yeah.
Pretty severely.
Yeah.
And the Justin Biebers and more modern, like, children that are put through this process, it's not to the same extent. But, Justin Bieber is certainly not a picture of mental health.
Mm-hmm. So you're spinning your wheels. Where are you going with this?
I think we talk about how art is hard to manufacture and market.
Yeah.
And we've actually gone so far as to manufacture and market artists.
Yeah.
Like Michael Jackson was made in a lab, like, in many ways.
Yeah.
And that's, not to take away from his talent. He clearly, like, knew how to sing. But it was really like his dad that, like, he made the Jackson 5. He was like a drill sergeant with them, and, like, kind of downright abusive. So, can artists be manufactured at all? And I would say maybe.
Obviously. Definitely. Is it healthy? No.
God has some input, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah, let's hear it, God.
So I'm not sure how much you guys know about virtual YouTubers, but those have seemed to become quite a thing over the course of quarantine.
Virtual YouTuber. How isn't every YouTuber virtual?
You would think, right? But virtual YouTubers are essentially like, I don't want to be nasty about it, but they're like skins for people to wear that you can use to.
It's like an avatar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a virtual avatar, mostly anime girls, of course, because internet. But they are like, they have personalities. They are marketed towards people. Apparently, there's even like, I don't know a lot about it because I'm not like into it or anything. But
not yet. You're not.
That's what people keep telling me.
That sounds like something that somebody who was into it would say.
I wish I had more information for you. But apparently, there's a company in like China, maybe Japan, I'm not totally sure, that like basically acts as an agency for these people that want to be virtual YouTubers. So they are almost quite literally manufacturing artists.
Oh yeah, it's like K-pop is this weird instance of it too.
Oh,
Well,
there you go too.
And actually, and now that I think about it, you very well could see a Led Zeppelin concert. Prince played the Super Bowl after he died.
Yeah, holograms, baby.
And he was actually specifically against holograms. He thought they were like abhorrent for a number of artistic.
Doesn't matter. He's dead now. Who cares what he wants?
Right, but because he's from Minnesota and that's where the Super Bowl was being played.
Yeah,
it just had to be done.
Sorry,
the market demanded it.
Yeah, I mean, and his estate made some cash. So what are you gonna do, Cam?
So, I mean, like, like, it's interesting. It's like, where my question when they start like reproducing these holograms, it's like, okay, where's the Bach hologram? Like, where's the Mozart hologram? Why don't we make those? Why don't we make holograms of like, Michelangelo, so we can watch him work? It's like, it's like because those things don't seem to sell or something. You're right. It's like everyone wants to see Prince because they had their first makeout session to his record or something like that. It's just like, again, it's just like, it's a little bit gross to me in certain ways. And for the entertainment value of it, it's like, oh, okay, cool. There's Prince. I can't really tell the difference from a hologram from like 100 yards away in a real person, but. It is. I think that's it cheapens it. Because it's like the whole point of the art is it's like, people, human beings, like making sense of the world. And like, I kind of think that there is an inherent sense of humanity, or humanness in art, or in our conception of art. And I feel like when we kind of remove that, all that's kind of left of the substance is the entertainment, right? It's like Prince exists as a hologram only in the sense that he entertains you and he makes you buy concessions and he makes you buy more merchandise. It's like he can't die because he's propping up so many commercial interests, and it's like sort of sad to me to see that, because it is kind of like, I don't know. I mean, would you be okay with like your likeness being used after your death?
Well, he explicitly wasn't. Like, he's rolling over in his grave watching.
If it was about like, oh, like we want to like really experience and see what these people were like, and we want to keep like learning about these and loving these people, then like then where's the Bach hologram? I want to see Bach playing a church organ as a hologram. You know what I mean? But
well, I mean, I get the point you're making, but it is really just a function of they don't have archival footage of Bach, right?
I would assume so.
That's how they build those holograms,
the hologram
using
does
archival
need
footage.
to look like that person.
I mean, I agree with you. If they had archival footage, it probably wouldn't be as prioritized as Prince. But there's also
deep fakes are going to be fine enough that you
from
could
paintings?
Just render from an oil painting a Bach.
Yeah.
And you have his music. It's composed. It was written down. It wasn't recorded.
Yeah.
I would like to pose that a painting is only the artist's interpretation of the person that they are seeing. So can you even really call that Bach?
Depends on how good of a painting it is. And I'll go back to the Greek tradition, because Socrates actually compares painting, or the visual like paintings, to written words. When a painting is painted, it is what it is, right? Like if you ask it a question, or if you ask to see any more, like you're not going to get any more out of it. It is produced, it is what it is. And then he says the same thing about words, right? Like once written, like it's immutable. You can't change it. Like sure, erasers exist, but if he was chiseling things on a tablet, like that's pretty much set in stone.
Literally.
But he talks about the difference between good writing and bad writing as basically whether or not to understand the words, you have to ask the author a follow-up question. If the words rely on their creator to have something else, spoken or to provide additional context, it's bad words. Good words are the ones that are entirely self-evident. And I think that's what makes a lot of art just good, right? Is if you don't need to know anymore, you don't need to know the context, you can just appreciate it because you get everything you need to out of it.
Yeah.
And I'd say like the product that you sell, for instance, it's good art. You don't need to ask any questions about like how it works or why it was created, because it's obvious. It's like A, it's working, and B, like it's cool to look at.
That makes you feel good.
Yeah, and soon that might be verified with science.
We got our top scientists on it as we speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we wrap this all together with a nice pretty bow on top?
Well, I think, sure, art is hard to manufacture. That's what makes it worth producing good art. And as for the challenges to market it, I think you just have to have patience, right? And assume that if it's good art, it will stand the test of time. It will market itself. It will one day be seen or consumed or tasted by somebody that will appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. And it's subjective entirely. Bad art to one is good art to another. Cam, what do you think about this? Any final remarks?
Again, it's hard because like I don't think anyone here is in the business. Like it's not we're not in the business of saying like there's one way to produce art. There's a good way and there's a bad way. There really isn't any way. I think the most forgiving and the best way that you can produce art is having an open mind and just having an awareness of a lot of the concepts that we talked about today. It's just like, what is the value of this art form? Is this like each piece of art needs to be evaluated subjectively, right? It's like Marx would probably, just like in the forces of production, you can't necessarily, art's not something that lends itself to like an assembly line. I mean, in a certain sense, right? Once it's created, it can certainly be manufactured. But each product, each art, each song, each album, whatever it is, it needs to be looked at with a subjective eye to what the artist intends, because that's where the art happens. It happens in the mind of the beholder, right? And like as long as that there is a fidelity to the purpose of the art, and the purpose of that art, and whether you could, without judgment, just no matter what they're doing, it's like as long as there's fidelity to the purpose throughout the mode of production and marketing, you're doing it. I think that's the best way that I can think of to know how. There's not like this is how you do it. It's just you need to subjectively evaluate and think critically with every piece of art that you need.
And so ways to avoid making bad art would be to put it on an assembly line. And to bring it all back around, I'll say this. The assembly line was invented by Henry Ford, who's from Michigan, where Kid Rock is from. Yeah.
They were in cahoots, for
think
sure.
on that.
Yeah.
America.
Wow, mind blower. Mm-hmm. Well, this has been our podcast.
Yeah, and this has been James.
This has been Brandon.
And that's...
Yeah, and I'm over here.
That's been Cam.
That's Cam in a can.
Yeah. And this has been Cognitive Cul-De-Sac. Thanks for watching.
Mm-hmm.
We love you.
Well, we like you. That's for sure.
Awesome, guys.
Thanks for helping out, Cam.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. That was a good time.
I had